opened it began with a letter that had yellowed over time. The paper, soft and fragile, carried the faint scent of lavender, the kind she used to press between the pages of her favorite books. Daniel found it in a box tucked away in the attic, sealed inside an envelope that had never been opened. His name was written in her handwriting, looping and graceful, like the wind had touched every letter. He held it carefully, as though afraid it might crumble in his hands. The letter was dated 48 years ago. Daniel sat by the attic window, the rain tapping gently on the glass. Outside, autumn leaves drifted through the yard, and the world felt wrapped in quiet gold. He stared at the letter for a long time before unfolding it. The words were written in blue ink, faded but legible, and as he began to read, the years seemed to fall away. "My dearest Daniel," it began. "I don't know if I have the right to write this. I don't even know if you'll ever read it. But tonight I can't sleep. The sound of the rain reminds me of you, of us, of the night we said goodbye." Daniel closed his eyes. The sound of the rain outside was the same now as it had been that night, gentle, endless, full of memories. He could still see her, standing under the old oak tree by the bus stop, her coat soaked, her hair clinging to her face. Her name was Eleanor. Everyone called her Ellie. She had been his first love, and perhaps his only one. They were 20 then, both dreamers. Daniel had plans to move to the city for college. Ellie wanted to stay in their small seaside town, where the days were slow and the sunsets lingered like promises. They had spent the summer walking along the beach, collecting shells, listening to the old jukebox at the diner that played their favorite song, Unchained Melody. Every time it came on, she'd rest her head on his shoulder, and he'd whisper, "We'll never forget this, right?" And she'd smile that quiet smile of hers and say, "Never." But the world had other plans. The night before he left for the city, she met him at the bus stop in the rain. She brought him a small wooden box she'd carved herself, with their initials on it. Inside was a pressed daisy and a small silver key. "This is for the promise," she'd said softly. "When you come back, you'll know what it's for." He had promised to write, but letters became fewer as months passed. College, work, the city, all of it swallowed him. He sent her a few postcards, short and rushed, and eventually they stopped altogether. He told himself life was moving forward, that young love was meant to fade. But in quiet moments, when the city lights flickered through his window, he thought of her, and he wondered if she still listened to that song. Now, 50 years later, Daniel sat holding her letter, feeling the ache of everything unsaid. The letter went on. "I waited for you longer than I should have. People told me to move on, that I was foolish to hold on to a boy who'd forgotten a girl from a small town. But you were never just a boy to me, Daniel. You were the sound of my youth, the laughter in my summer, the promise that love could be gentle. When I married Michael, I told myself it was time to let go. He was kind and loved me deeply. But every year, when the first autumn rain came, I thought of you. Maybe you'll never read this. Maybe I'll never send it. But if I do, it's only because I want you to know you were loved once, completely, and perhaps still." Daniel's hands trembled. He looked out the window again, the rain blurring everything into soft watercolor. Ellie had been gone 10 years now. He'd read her name in the local paper when he'd moved back after retiring. Eleanor Hayes, beloved wife, mother, and friend. He hadn't attended the funeral. He didn't have the courage. He remembered seeing her once, maybe 20 years after they parted. It was at a bookstore downtown. She was standing by the window, her hair streaked with gray, a young girl beside her, probably her daughter. Their eyes met for a brief second. She smiled politely, as if he were a stranger. But in that one look, he knew she remembered. He wanted to say something, to tell her he was sorry, that life hadn't gone the way he thought it would, but words froze in his throat. She turned and walked away, and that was the last time he saw her. He sat back in his chair, the letter open on his lap. For a long time he listened to the rain. Then, as if guided by memory, he walked to the piano in the corner of the room. It had been years since he'd played, but his fingers found the keys naturally. Slowly he began to play Unchained Melody. The notes filled the quiet house, soft and trembling. For a moment, he could almost see her again, barefoot on the beach, hair dancing in the wind, laughter echoing across the waves. He stopped playing and whispered, "I'm sorry, Ellie. I really am." The room answered with silence. The days that followed passed gently. Daniel began to visit the old seaside diner where they used to sit. It had changed, new owners, new faces, but the jukebox was still there, now more of a relic than anything else. One afternoon, he asked the owner if it still worked. The man smiled and said, "Barely, but it does." Daniel dropped a coin in, and as if on cue, Unchained melody began to play. The melody drifted through the air like a ghost, soft and haunting. Daniel closed his eyes, and for a moment he wasn't 80 anymore. He was 20 again, and she was there beside him. He began to write letters, not to send, but to talk to her. Each letter began with "Dear Ellie," and ended with "Love always, Daniel." He wrote about his days, about how quiet the house felt, about how he finally understood what she meant when she said love never really leaves. It just changes shape. He kept the letters in the same wooden box she had given him so many years ago. Inside, he found that small silver key again. He had never known what it opened. Curiosity led him back to the old house she had lived in, now abandoned. With permission from the new owner, he wandered through the rooms, sunlight spilling through the dusty windows. In her old study, he found a small chest tucked under the window seat. The lock was tarnished, but the key fit perfectly. Inside were photographs, black and white, some faded, some still clear. There were letters too, tied with a ribbon. And in one of them, a photograph of the two off them at the beach, laughing. On the back, she had written, "For the promise." Daniel sat there for a long time, tears blurring his sight. In that box, he found pieces of their story. Moments she had kept safe, as though she'd always believed he'd come back someday. And in a way, he had. Just too late. That night, he went back to the shore. The tide was low, the sky brushed with the last light of dusk. He sat on the same rock where they had once watched the sunset. He held the photograph in his hand and whispered, "You kept the promise, Ellie. Thank you." He placed the photograph inside the wooden box, closed it, and set it gently on the sand. The waves crept in, touching it softly, as if taking it home. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the world turned to quiet silver. Daniel smiled through tears, feeling something lift from his chest. For the first time in years, he felt peace. Maybe love doesn't always arrive when we want it to. Maybe sometimes it returns too late. But when it does, even for a moment, it reminds us who we were and what it means to truly feel alive. Weeks later, the neighbors found Daniel in his chair by the window, a faint smile on his face, and the piano keys still humming softly in the wind. On the table beside him was a letter addressed simply, "To whoever finds this, if you ever loved someone, tell them. Don't wait for the years to pass. Don't let pride or fear steal what could be the best part of your life." At the bottom, he had signed, "Daniel Hayes, for Ellie." And as the rain began again outside, the world seemed to hum that old familiar tune, gentle, timeless, and full of everything that was never said, but always felt.